The box Nina Castro was carrying when she turned onto Madeira Lane that Saturday morning held exactly the things she had been putting off collecting for 6 weeks. Her mother's rosary, the wooden beads worn smooth from 30 years of daily use. A ceramic figure of Our Lady of Guadalupe that had stood on the windowsill above the kitchen sink since the day her parents moved into the house in 1989 and had never once been repositioned, so that the shelf beneath it still held the pale ring of where it had lived for 3 decades. A bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine that Nina had not yet been able to open, and a coffee mug with a chipped handle printed with the words "World's Best Mom" in letters that had faded from blue to something closer to gray from being run through the dishwasher 1,000 times. She had been telling herself she would go back for 6 weeks. Each week something had come up, and each week she had let it, because going back to the house required a quality of readiness she had not yet been able to gather. Not that she hadn't tried to prepare herself. She had. But preparation and readiness are different things, and 6 weeks of talking herself into the drive had not produced what the drive actually required. It was a Saturday morning in late June, already hot the way Tucson is hot in late June. A flat pressing brightness that turned the pavement pale and made the air taste faintly of dust and the particular stillness that descends on the city by 9 in the morning when the temperature has already climbed past 90. Lily sat in the passenger seat eating crackers from a sandwich bag, narrating the radio with the complete confidence of a 9-year-old who has not yet discovered that her opinions are optional. The route down Madeira Lane was the same drive Nina had made 10,000 times, or close enough to 10,000 that the exact number didn't matter. The right turn-off oracle, the slight dip where the road sank before the intersection, the view down the block with the oleanders along the fence lines and the houses sitting in their yards in the flat white heat. She parked in front of the house, the driveway where she had learned to ride a bike at age 6, her father running beside her and letting go before she knew he had. The porch where her mother had spent her evenings with a glass of iced tea watching the street settle into dark, until the evenings became too hot, at which point Dolores moved her chair inside beside the window and watched the same stretch of street through the glass with the fan going, because the ritual mattered more than the temperature. The Bougainvillea her mother had planted along the front fence in 1994, still blooming its deep magenta the way it bloomed every June, completely indifferent to everything that had changed since May. She saw the sign before she understood what she was looking at. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. It was planted in the center of the front yard, directly in front of the Bougainvillea. Large, cream-colored, with a real estate logo she didn't recognize. Beneath the main body of the sign, attached with 2 metal clips, a second panel with a single word printed in bold across it. Sold. Nina sat with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine still running. Lily was mid-sentence about something she'd heard on the radio. The Bougainvillea was blooming. The street was quiet with the particular Saturday quiet of a neighborhood where people were still inside. Nina read the word on the sign. She read it a second time. It said the same thing both times. She turned off the engine. "Stay in the car for a second," she said to Lily. "Don't get out." Lily looked up from the sandwich bag. "How come?" "Just for a second." She got out. She crossed the dry lawn to the sign and stood in front of it in the June heat and confirmed that the word "sold" was not something she had misread from the street. She turned to look at the house. The front door had a lockbox on the handle she didn't recognize. The paper slot on the mailbox at the edge of the driveway, where her mother's name had always been, now held a printed card that read Realty Associates of Southern Arizona with a phone number below it. She walked to the front door and tried the key she had kept on her keyring for 20 years. It didn't turn. Someone had changed the lock. She stood on the porch her mother had swept every Saturday morning and looked at the street. The neighbor's orange tree, the same cracked stretch of sidewalk, the same slant of morning light across the same houses. Everything the same except the lockbox on the door and the paper in the mailbox and the sign in the Bougainvillea. She went back to the car. She told Lily it was okay. She pulled out of the driveway of her mother's house and drove home. She called Marco from the apartment parking lot before she went upstairs, because she didn't want Lily to hear the conversation, and because she knew that going upstairs first would mean putting the box down and making something for Lily to eat and letting the afternoon move forward while she waited for an answer, and she was not capable of that. He picked up on the third ring. The sign in front of Mom's house. Nina said. The one that says sold. Tell me what that means. A pause. Not long. Marco had been managing difficult conversations since childhood by controlling what he released and in what order, deciding in advance how much to give at each interval. I was going to tell you, he said. I needed to get the paperwork sorted first. Tell me what, Marco? I sold the house. We've talked about this. We did not talk about this. We talked about how we couldn't keep it. Property taxes are due in November. Neither of us is in a position to maintain a vacant property. Marco. She stopped, started again more carefully. Whose name was on the deed? It was Mom's house, left to both of us equally. You know what the will says. I know what I read, Nina said. I want to know what you did. What he had done came out over the following 40 minutes in the controlled, measured rhythm of a man releasing what he can no longer conceal while holding back what he still thinks he can. 3 weeks after the funeral, he had contacted a real estate agent he used in Phoenix, a man named Gary Pollard with Tucson market connections. He had described the property as a probate estate needing to move quickly. Gary had listed it for 1 week and brought Marco an offer from a development company called Sonoran Western Properties. $340,000. Marco had accepted. He had hired an attorney he found online to handle closing documents. The sale had closed 11 days ago. 11 days ago, Nina said. I've already sent you your share. $60,000. It should be in your account. She checked her account from the parking lot. $60,000 sat where she had had $847 that morning. I want you to understand something, Nina said. You cannot sell jointly inherited property without the co-heir's consent. That is not an opinion. That is Arizona law. We both inherited equally. I have as much legal standing to act on the estate as you do. That is not how it works. Then hire a lawyer. His voice had flattened slightly, taken on the specific tone of a man who has anticipated this exact conversation and decided in advance that he can wait it out. I moved because we had to move. The taxes are real. Maintenance on an empty house is real. And your $60,000 is real, Nina. It's in your account. I'm not touching that money. That's up to you. She ended the call. She sat in the parking lot with the phone in her lap and the $60,000 sitting in her account like a problem she hadn't agreed to receive. She did not deposit it. She called the bank on Monday morning and asked them to flag the transfer as disputed while she looked into the matter. To understand what Marco had done and how he had moved so fast, you have to understand who these two people were to each other and to the house they had grown up in, because the house had not meant the same thing to both of them. Not for a long time. Dolores and Ernesto Castro had come to Tucson from Nogales in the spring of 1987. Ernesto with a job at a construction company south of downtown and Dolores with part-time bookkeeping work at a dentist's office on Speedway Boulevard. They rented for 2 years, saved with the specific patience of people who have learned that no one is going to hand them what they need, and bought the house on Madera Lane in 1989 for $67,000. For Dolores, who had spent her childhood watching her own parents rent in 3 cities across 2 decades, the purchase was not a transaction. It was a statement. It was the thing you worked toward when you worked the way she worked, steadily and without expecting recognition, with the long horizon of someone who understands that the work and the reward are not on the same timeline and that you do the work anyway. She kept the house the way she kept everything she considered hers, with focused care and no shortcuts. She painted the interior every 5 years, the same warm off-white she had chosen the first time, using a roller she bought at the hardware store and spending 1 Saturday per room. She fixed what broke as soon as she could fix it herself and called someone the moment she could afford to call someone when she couldn't. She planted the Bougainvillea the summer Marco was 7 because she had seen one blooming at a neighbor's fence and decided she wanted one. And she tended it every spring from then on with the specific devotion she brought to things that grew. Ernesto died in February of 2003. He was 51 years old. He was sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning reading the newspaper when it happened, and a neighbor found him an hour later. Marco was 18 and about to graduate from high school. Nina was 13. Dolores had made every decision that needed making with the same composure she brought to everything difficult, the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned to work with what arrived rather than grieve what she had expected. and then she had gone back to work and back to the mortgage payments and back to the house. She paid the mortgage off in 2014 with an inheritance from her own mother's estate and several years of careful management. And she spoke of that fact for the rest of her life with the quiet satisfaction of a person who has completed a long, demanding piece of work and knows the worth of what they have finished. After that, the house was entirely hers. No debt. That was a different thing from having a house with debt. Dolores understood the difference and treated it accordingly. Marco had left for Arizona State at 19 and stayed in Phoenix afterward, working in sales for a technology distributor, then transitioning to commercial real estate development in his early 30s, when he connected with investors who needed someone with his particular combination of persistence and charm. He made a reasonable living. He came home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Dolores's birthday, and the occasional weekend. He called every Sunday. He sent money when he had it. He was not, by any ordinary measure, a neglectful son. He was not the one who was there. Nina had been there in the specific, sustained, unglamorous way of being the person who shows up not once or twice but consistently, across years, across seasons, across every appointment and medication change and morning when her mother's balance was worse than it had been the day before. She had been there the way a person is there when they have made a decision, probably not all at once but gradually and then finally, that this is what their life is for right now and that they are going to do it properly. She had become a certified home health aide 8 years ago. Her original plan had involved the community college business administration degree she had finished at 24 and a stable office job somewhere with the distant possibility of advancement. What had happened instead was that her mother's type 2 diabetes diagnosis had been followed 6 months later by the diagnosis of a progressive condition affecting her balance and coordination, and the combination had made it clear that Dolores was going to need more help than she could ask for, and that Nina was the one in a position to provide it. The certification had made practical sense. It gave her the scheduling flexibility to manage her mother's medical appointments alongside paid work. She had also turned out to be genuinely good at it, good in the way that comes not from training but from a real quality of attention, the ability to be present with another person's needs without making that person feel observed or managed. Gerald Moss at Sunrise Home Health had given her his highest peer rating 3 years in a row. She kept the papers in a folder in the kitchen drawer next to Lily's school reports and the documents she needed to locate quickly. Lily had come home from the hospital 9 years ago with Nina as her only parent. Nina had ended things with Scott before Lily was born, after recognizing that his relationship with alcohol required all of his attention for the foreseeable future and probably longer, and that Lily would need someone reliable in a way Scott was not able to be. She had made that decision clearly and without drama and had not revisited it. She named the baby Lily because her mother had always loved the flowers and grown them in pots on the back porch, and because the name felt like starting correctly. Her apartment on Grant Road cost $875 a month and had one bedroom that she had divided with a curtain into a sleeping area for Lily near the window and a smaller space for herself along the wall. She had lived there 4 years. It was clean, well-managed, and 4 blocks from the elementary school, which she thought about every morning she and Lily walked there. Her mother's house had been, throughout Nina's adult life, the fixed point, the anchor, the place where Lily ran through the kitchen calling for Abuela and her mother pressed containers of food into Nina's arms for the week ahead, and the Bougainvillea bloomed every June, and the laundry detergent Dolores used, a different brand from Nina's, made the towels smell unlike anything anywhere else. Most Sunday mornings, for years and years. When Dolores died in May, quietly in her own bed at 71, her heart finishing what it had started, Nina had sat with her body for a long time before she called anyone. Just the two of them in the house on Madeira Lane. Her mother's hand in hers, which was warm for a while and then wasn't. Marco had come for the funeral and stayed 5 days and cried genuinely and been present with Nina in a way that felt real. He had helped sort through some of his mother's clothing and taken the things Dolores had said he should have. Their father's watch, the framed wedding photograph, a handmade quilt from Dolores's own mother that Marco had loved as a child. He had held Nina for a long time at the airport when he left and said, "Call me if you need anything," and she had believed him. He had not said a word about the house. He had waited until she was back at work. Until she was back in the rhythm of other people's medication schedules and Lily's school mornings and the $16.40 per hour that covered the rent and the groceries and Lily's after-school program, with perhaps $200 left at the end of the month when nothing unexpected happened, which was not always. He had waited, and then he had moved fast. The legal aid office on Stone Avenue had a Tuesday appointment available 3.5 weeks after she found the sign. She sat across from a paralegal named Jerome, perhaps 25 years old, wearing his glasses low on his nose, with the focused and slightly worn attentiveness of someone doing serious work on a limited budget and doing it carefully anyway. She explained the situation in the order it had occurred, the way she always explained complicated things, because she had learned that chronological and unembellished was the fastest route to being understood. Jerome listened. He asked 3 questions. Then he said there were 3 things worth looking into. The first, the timeline. Standard probate on a property in Arizona, even a simple one, ran a minimum of 4 to 6 months. Marco's sale had closed in under 8 weeks. Possible, Jerome said, but it required specific documentation she should request from the county recorder's office. The second, the will. She had read the will from her mother's filing cabinet. But that will was 7 years old. She had not confirmed with an attorney whether it was the most current valid document, whether any subsequent will or codicil existed. She had assumed. She shouldn't have assumed. The third, the deed. The deed to 1412 Madera Lane was a public document available from the Pima County assessor. She should request a copy and look carefully at whose name was listed, how title was held, and whether anything about the ownership structure had changed in recent years. She wrote all 3 points on the back of Jerome's appointment card. She took the bus to the assessor's office that same afternoon. She filled out the request form. She waited 18 minutes in a plastic chair. The woman behind the counter brought her a printed document. Nina sat in the plastic chair and read the document twice. The listed owner of 1412 Madera Lane was the Dolores Castro Revocable Living Trust, dated August 14th, 2 years before her mother's death. She read that line a 3rd time. Then she folded the document and held it in her lap and looked at the institutional wall across the room. A pale greenish beige that had been the same color for a long time, and she thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table 7 years ago filling out will forms with a preparer who charged $60. And then she thought about her mother doing something different, something additional 2 years ago without telling anyone. She thought she understood why her mother hadn't told her. Dolores Castro had spent 30 years carefully managing how much weight she put on Nina's shoulders, always trying to make the load lighter rather than heavier. And telling Nina about the trust would have meant giving Nina something else to manage. So she had handled it herself. She had gone to a lawyer on her own and made arrangements she did not tell anyone about, because telling anyone was the same as asking them to hold it, and she had decided Nina was already holding enough. She thought about Marco. She thought about her mother's particular tone when Marco's name came up in the last 2 years of her life, the warmth that was genuine and the something else that lived alongside it, the faint containment in her voice, the quality of speaking about someone you love and have decided to protect from certain information. Nina had noticed it and had not named it, because naming it felt disloyal and her mother did not invite the naming. Now she named it to herself, sitting in the assessor's office in July. Her mother had seen something coming, and she had prepared for it before it arrived. It was 3 months before any of this that Nina had been standing in the parking lot of the CVS on Oracle Road at 11:15 in the morning, coming out through the pharmacy door with 2 prescriptions for her mother and the specific hand cream Dolores liked that was only stocked at this location, when she heard a sound different from the parking lot's ordinary sounds. The particular scrape and shift of something going suddenly wrong. She turned around. A man was on the asphalt between 2 parked cars, one hand braced against the rear tire of a pickup truck, trying to push himself upright and not making it. He was in his mid to late 70s, with white hair and the build of someone who had been significantly larger at an earlier point in his life, the frame still there but the mass reduced by time. He had a cane lying on the asphalt beside him, roughly 18 inches from his reach, evidently dropped when he fell. There were 3 other people in Nina's immediate sightline at that moment. A woman in her 40s loading bags into an SUV 2 cars over, who looked up at the sound, looked at the man on the ground, and looked back at her trunk. A young man in earbuds who walked through the parking aisle without pausing or appearing to register that anything was happening. A teenager pushing a shopping cart toward the cart return who stopped, looked at the man, and then pushed the cart the rest of the way to the return and got into a waiting car. Nina had already set her pharmacy bag on the nearest car's roof and crossed the aisle before the teenager's door clicked shut. She crouched beside him. "Sir, are you hurt? Can you tell me what happened?" He looked up at her with eyes that were completely present, sharp and clear, the eyes of someone whose mind was not in any way involved in the fall his body had just taken. "My hip went out from under me," he said. "I've had hip problems before and I don't believe it's broken because I know what that feels like and this is different. But I cannot get myself off this pavement unassisted." He said it with the dry practicality of someone using understatement to manage simultaneous pain and embarrassment. "I'm a home health aide," Nina said. "My name is Nina. Before we try to move you, I'm going to check your hip. What's your name?" "Raymond. Raymond Kessler." She spent 3 minutes assessing him the way she had been trained to assess a client who had fallen. Checking for the specific indicators of a fracture, asking him to describe the pain, asking him to move his foot. His foot moved. His descriptions were coherent and precise. The hip hurt, but without the quality that meant the bone had given way. "You're okay," she said. "We're going to get you up slowly. Do you have someone you can call?" "My son. His number is in my phone. My phone is in my car. I walked out without it, which was the first mistake." "Where's your car?" "2 rows over. Blue Camry." She helped him to his feet using the technique she used with clients who outweighed her body as counterweight, one arm under his, steadying his movement. She walked him 2 rows to the Camry. She found his phone and called the number labeled David and left a message describing what had happened and where they were. She called the second number in recent calls, labeled David Work, and left the same message. Then she helped Raymond into the passenger seat because driving was not realistic, and she gave him water from the bottle she carried in her bag, and then she stood beside the open car door. She thought about the time. Her mother's afternoon medications needed to arrive by 1. It was 11:40. She thought about leaving. She had done what she could. His son had been called. He was off the pavement. She could go. She did not go. She leaned against the car door beside him and said, "I'm going to wait with you until someone calls back. Tell me something." Raymond Kessler looked at her. Something moved through his face that was not quite surprise, but was the specific expression of a person who has stopped expecting to be treated a certain way and has just encountered it again after a long absence. "I was a real estate attorney," he said. 41 years. Tucson. Mostly here. Some Maricopa County work early on. "I'm a home health aide. 8 years. He asked whether she liked it, and she thought about the question before she answered, the way she thought about questions that deserved a real answer. She said she liked being useful. She liked knowing that her presence in a situation made the situation better for the person she was with. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who understood what that meant. They talked for 37 minutes in the Oracle Road heat beside his Camry. He told her about his wife Margaret, who had died 4 years ago, describing her illness briefly in the way widowers describe those losses when they are not yet ready to open them fully to a stranger, acknowledging what happened without dwelling in it. He told her about his practice, his retirement, the cane he sometimes left in the car against every doctor's advice and always regretted. He asked about her work and about Lily and about her mother. He asked his questions with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who was genuinely interested in her answers, not performing interest. David Kessler called back at 12:02 and pulled into the parking lot at 12:21. He was perhaps 40, with his father's directness and a handshake that communicated genuine gratitude without any performance of it. He gave Nina his card, said please don't hesitate, and meant it. Nina said she was glad his father was okay, picked up her pharmacy bag from the car roof where it had been sitting for over an hour, and drove to her mother's house. She went back the next morning, not because she had planned to, but because when she woke she found herself wondering whether Raymond had seen a doctor and whether his hip was causing him serious trouble. She drove to St. Joseph's Hospital, the nearest one to the CVS, and asked at the front desk. They had no patient by that name. She stopped at a Walgreens, bought a small card, and wrote in it, "I hope you're getting around better. Nina from the parking lot." She found his address in the phone book, which was an old habit that sometimes still worked, and drove to a house in the foothills with desert landscaping and a flagstone path to the front door. David opened the door and looked at her for a moment. "You're the woman from the parking lot," he said. "I just wanted to check on him." He opened the door wider. "He'll want to see you." Raymond was in an armchair with an ice pack on his hip and a law journal in his lap that she could see he hadn't been reading. When she came in, his face did the same thing it had done in the parking lot, that expression of unexpected warmth arriving on someone who had stopped anticipating it. They talked for 45 minutes. He showed her a photograph of Margaret. He asked David to make coffee, and David did, and Nina sat in the chair across from Raymond and drank it and answered his questions about Lily and her mother and the work she did every day, honestly and without minimizing. He listened the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak but are actually inside what you are saying. Before she left, he said something she didn't quite know what to do with at the time. He said, "You were the only one who stopped." He said it simply as a fact he had been sitting with. 3 people walked past. You stopped and stayed. "Someone had to," Nina said. He looked at her with a particular stillness, the look of someone filing something carefully away. "Yes," he said. "Someone had to." She had not gone back after that visit. The weeks had moved fast the way weeks move when you are managing another person's daily requirements alongside your own, and her mother's condition had shifted in a direction that demanded more, and there had never quite been the moment to drive to the foothills. She thought of him occasionally, in the vague warm way you think about someone you met briefly and liked. She hoped the cane was in his hand when he needed it. She did not think about him in relation to anything else. There was no reason to. She did not know yet that Raymond Kessler had spent 41 years building a network of professional relationships that covered most of Pima County. She did not know that he still consulted occasionally, still reviewed titles and trust documents as a favor to former colleagues, still knew every significant real estate attorney in the city by name. She did not know that any of that was going to matter. Not yet. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She found the name of the trust's attorney 2 weeks after she found the deed. Jerome had pointed her toward it. "Look at the bottom of the deed document," he said. "The preparer's information is sometimes recorded there." She looked at the deed copy she had been reading past for days. In the lower right corner, in small print she had missed 3 times, was a single line. "Document prepared by A. Ruiz, Ruiz Estate Law, 4801 East Broadway Boulevard, Tucson, Arizona, 85711. She found Gerald Oviatt through Jerome's referral. A solo practitioner on Speedway Boulevard, methodical and affordable, the kind of man who did not make clients feel they were using up time that had better purposes. She sat across from him on a Thursday afternoon and spread the documents on his desk. The deed with the trust language, the photograph Marco had texted her of the will, the county recorder filing showing the sale of 1412 Madera Lane. Gerald put on his reading glasses. He went through each document slowly. He did not speak until he had read everything. "The trust supersedes the will for this property," he said finally. "That's clear under Arizona law. The will may be entirely valid for any other assets your mother had, but for the house, the trust is controlling. The question for the sale is whether the title company did a proper title search before closing. Would they have found the trust? They're required to look for it. A title company runs a search on every Arizona property before closing. They're looking for exactly this kind of thing: encumbrances, ownership structures, trusts, liens. If they did a competent search on this address, they found the trust. And if they found it and the sale went through anyway?" Gerald looked at her steadily over his glasses. "Then this closing has a serious problem. Property held in a revocable living trust cannot be sold without the trustee's authorization. The trustee is the sole person with that authority. Unless your brother was named trustee in this trust document, he had no legal right to sell. We don't know who the trustee is." "No, but there's a way to find out." He turned the deed over and looked at the lower corner. He went quiet for a moment. Then he made a small sound. "What?" Nina said. He turned the deed to face her and pointed to the preparer line. "Angela Ruiz," he said. "I know her practice. She's been doing estate planning in this city for 20 years. She's very careful, very thorough. He set the deed down. You need to call her today. Nina called from Gerald's parking lot. Patricia at Ruiz Estate Law answered with the particular warmth of someone who handles a specific kind of caller regularly and has developed the right register for it. Nina gave her name and said she was calling about the Dolores Castro Revocable Living Trust, dated August 14th. Patricia said she would need to check with Ms. Ruiz and would call back. She called back in 11 minutes. Ms. Ruiz could see Nina tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And then Patricia said one more thing, at the very end of the call, with the careful precision of someone delivering a message word by word as it was given to her. She said, Ms. Ruiz wanted you to know she has been expecting this call for several weeks. She said if you're the person she believes you are, there are things your mother wanted you to know. Nina stood in the parking lot on Speedway in the July heat with her phone in her hand and the afternoon pressing down on the back of her neck. Traffic moved behind her. The air tasted of hot asphalt and the particular stillness of a city in midsummer that has given up pretending the heat is temporary. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table 7 years ago with the preparer who charged $60. She thought about her mother going somewhere different 2 years later, going alone to a careful, thorough attorney on East Broadway, doing something she had not told anyone about. She thought about what that document might say and why her mother had kept it quiet. She understood why. Dolores Castro had spent a lifetime trying to make the load her daughter carried lighter rather than heavier. Telling Nina about the trust would have been handing her something else to manage. So she had managed it herself. She had made arrangements and said nothing and left the document sitting in the county recorder's database, waiting for the moment when Nina found the right thread and followed it to where her mother had intended her to go. The document had been waiting. The attorney had been waiting. Her mother had, in the only way still available to her, been waiting. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Nina drove home. She made dinner. Lily ate at the kitchen table and told her about a book she was reading, a story about a girl who discovers a hidden room in her grandmother's house. Nina listened with the specific quality of attention she gave Lily when her mind was partly elsewhere, needing the sound of her daughter's voice to keep her tethered to the present. The steady, real fact of Lily talking with her hands the way she always talked, certain and expressive, entirely herself. "Mama," Lily said, "are you actually listening?" "Yes," Nina said. "Tell me about the room again." She put Lily to bed at 8:30. She sat at the kitchen table with the folder of documents in front of her, and the July heat still held inside the apartment despite the fan she had running in the window. She looked at the deed. She looked at the line at the bottom, A. Ruiz Estate Law. For 35 days she had operated on the assumption that the house was gone. She had built her understanding of what came next around that fact, around the $60,000 she hadn't touched and the wound of the thing and the colder wound beneath it, the one that told her Marco had been planning this before there was anything to plan, had been waiting for their mother to die before the speed of what he did could even register. She was not certain, sitting at the table at 10 in the evening in July, that the house could be recovered. She didn't yet have enough to be certain of anything. But something had shifted in the days since Jerome pointed her toward the deed, and what had shifted was this. The floor under her might not be where Marco had told her it was. The floor might be more solid. Her mother might have made the floor more solid without telling her, the way Dolores had always made things more solid without drawing attention to the doing of it. She folded the documents back into the folder. She turned off the kitchen light. She stood in the dark of the apartment and listened to the building around her. A television above, a car on Grant Road, Lily's steady breathing through the curtain. She thought about a woman who had gone to a careful lawyer 2 years ago and made arrangements no one knew about, and who had left those arrangements sitting quietly in a county database, waiting. Her mother had been several moves ahead. She went to bed. She slept badly, but she slept. In the morning she got up, made Lily's breakfast, walked Lily to school, came back to the apartment, changed into something clean, and got back in the car. She drove east on Broadway toward a building she had never been to have a conversation her mother had started 2 years ago and left open, in the specific patient way of a woman who understood that she would not always be there to finish her own sentences, and had made certain that someone else would be able to finish them for her. She did not know, driving east on Broadway with the morning sun in her eyes and the city doing its ordinary weekday business around her, that Raymond Kessler had received a phone call the previous Thursday evening from a former colleague named Paul Dutton, who still worked in title insurance, and who had called to ask Raymond about a trust document that had come up in a title search, a trust document that appeared to have been completely bypassed in the closing of a residential property on Madeira Lane. She did not know that Raymond had asked for the address. She did not know that he had gone very still when Paul said 1412 Madeira Lane. She did not know that he had thanked Paul, ended the call, and sat for a long time in the chair in the living room where she had sat across from him in March, with the ice pack long gone and the law journal still on the side table, thinking about a woman who had stopped in a parking lot and stayed when there was no reason to stay except that someone had needed her to. She was driving east on Broadway. She didn't know any of it yet, but she was about to find out what her mother had left for her. And she was about to find out that the real owner of 1412 Madeira Lane had just gotten off the phone with a title insurance agent and was now sitting very still in a chair in the foothills, doing the specific arithmetic of a man who has spent 41 years in real estate law and has just realized that a sale he is connected to was built on a fraudulent foundation, and that the woman he has been thinking about since March is the one it was built to harm. Angela Ruiz had the kind of office that told you exactly what kind of lawyer she was before she said a single word. Not decorated for impression, organized for work. 2 walls of shelved binders in labeled order. A desk with 3 neat stacks of folders and a yellow legal pad beside each one. A framed photograph on the credenza behind her chair that Nina noticed immediately. A woman, perhaps 70, standing in a garden with her arms full of flowers, laughing at something off camera. Not a professional photograph. A personal one, placed where Angela would see it while she worked. Angela herself was in her early 50s, compact and precise, with reading glasses on a chain and the measured, unhurried manner of a woman who had been doing careful work for a long time and had stopped needing to perform competence for anyone. She stood when Nina came in and shook her hand with the grip of someone who means the handshake. "Sit down," she said. "I have a lot to tell you, and I want to get through all of it before we talk about what comes next." Nina sat. She set her folder of documents on the edge of the desk. Angela glanced at it and said, "You've already been doing your homework. That will save us some time." She opened the folder on her own desk, the top folder in the nearest stack, and Nina could see her mother's name on the tab in Angela's careful handwriting. "Your mother came to see me in August, 2 years before she died," Angela said. "She came alone. She had been referred by a woman at her church whose daughter I'd helped with a different matter. She sat where you're sitting now and she said very directly that she wanted to make sure her house went to her daughter and that no one could interfere with that. Those were her words. She said no one could interfere. She did not name your brother. She did not need to. The way she said it told me everything I needed to know." Nina looked at her hands in her lap. "She was completely lucid," Angela said. "I want to say that clearly because these situations sometimes get complicated by questions about a client's capacity, and there will be no question here. Your mother spent 2.5 hours in this office over 2 visits. She understood every document she signed. She asked good questions. She thought about her answers. I have my notes from both meetings and they reflect a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and why." She turned the folder to face Nina and pushed it across the desk. The Dolores Castro Revocable Living Trust. Established August 14th. The property at 1412 Madeira Lane was transferred into the trust on September 2nd, following recording at the Pima County Recorder's Office. That recording is why it appears on the deed. Nina looked at the cover page of the trust document. Her mother's signature at the bottom, the same handwriting as the grocery lists Nina had found in the kitchen drawer after she died. Neat and slightly cramped, the hand of a woman who had grown up writing in the margins of things. "Who is the trustee?" Nina asked. "You are. Nina Elena Castro, named as sole trustee and sole beneficiary of the trust. The trust gives you complete authority over the property, to maintain it, rent it, sell it at your sole discretion, or pass it to your own descendants as you see fit. Your mother made you the only person with legal authority to make any decision about that house." The morning had gone very quiet. Through the window behind Angela's desk, Nina could see the east side of Broadway, The ordinary Wednesday morning traffic. A bus pulling away from a stop. Marco had no authority, Nina said. It was not a question. None. Under Arizona law, property held in a revocable living trust is controlled exclusively by the trustee. Your brother has no standing as a co-heir because the property is not part of the probate estate. It's trust property. It passed to you automatically as beneficiary at the moment of your mother's death, without going through probate at all. He cannot sell it. He cannot sign on it. He cannot authorize anything. Then how did the sale close? Angela took a slow breath. She leaned back slightly in her chair. This was, Nina understood, the part she had been building toward. That is the question I have been working on since I learned of the sale 3 weeks ago, Angela said. I have a professional obligation to my client, your mother, and by extension to you as the trust's beneficiary. When a property I've worked on is sold under circumstances that appear to contradict the trust's provisions, I have both an ethical and legal responsibility to look into it. I've been doing that, and what I've found is not a mistake. She pulled a second document from beneath the trust folder. It was a title report, the kind Nina had started to recognize from her sessions with Gerald Oviatt, dense columns of recorded instruments and dates and document numbers. Every property sale in Arizona goes through a title company. The title company runs a search on the property's full recorded history before they'll issue title insurance. That search would have found this trust. It is recorded. It is not ambiguous. It is the kind of instrument a competent title search cannot miss. She pointed to a line on the report. Sunset Valley Title Services ran the search on 1412 Madera Lane in conjunction with this sale. Their search was completed May 31st. The trust was recorded September 2nd, 2 years ago. It appears in their results. They found it. They found it. Nina looked at the report. Then the sale should have stopped. It should have. Angela set the report flat on the desk. It did not stop. The closing happened on June 7th, 11 days before you drove to Madera Lane and saw the sign. And when the closing happened, the trust was not disclosed to the buyer in the standard title commitment the way it should have been. The notation of the trust appears in the preliminary search, and then it does not appear in the final commitment issued to the buyer. She let that sit for a moment. Nina thought it through step by step. Someone removed it, Nina said. Something happened between the preliminary search and the final commitment that caused the trust notation to disappear from the documents the buyer received. I don't know yet whether that was negligence or something else, but I know the difference between a clerical error and a decision, and this does not look like a clerical error to me. Nina thought about Marco calling the real estate agent he used in Phoenix. Marco describing the property as a probate estate needing to move quickly. Marco, who had grown up in the same house she had, who knew the same mother she had known, who had held her at the airport and said, "Call me if you need anything." He would have needed someone inside the title company, she said, or someone who knew how to frame the transaction in a way that made the trust appear irrelevant, or a closing attorney who was willing to look past what the search turned up. I don't know the mechanism yet. What I know is that the result was a sale that should not legally have happened. Angela looked at her steadily. I also know that the development company that purchased the property, Sonoran Western, is not a small operation. They buy residential properties for conversion and resale across southern Arizona. They have done a high volume of transactions. Whether they purchased in good faith or whether they had reason to know about the trust's provisions is something that needs to be investigated. Nina sat with all of it. The June sun falling through Angela's window. The framed photograph behind the desk. The laughing woman with her arms full of flowers. The trust document with her mother's handwriting on the signature line. She knew, Nina said, not to Angela specifically, to herself or to the room, or to some version of her mother she was now seeing clearly for the first time. She knew he would try something. That's why she went to a lawyer. She didn't tell me that directly, Angela said, but she was specific about what she wanted protected and from what. She used the phrase "no one can interfere." That's not the language of a woman making routine estate plans. That's the language of a woman anticipating something. Nina thought about Sunday phone calls and airport hugs and the quality of her mother's voice when Marco's name came up in the last 2 years, that faint containment, the warmth and the something else running beneath it. Dolores Castro had been watching something develop for long enough to take action against it, quietly, without alerting anyone, the way she did everything that required protecting. Alone, efficiently, without drama. "What can I do?" Nina said. Angela put her glasses on. "Several things. And I want to walk through all of them because some of them will move fast and I want you to understand what you're agreeing to before any of it starts." She picked up the legal pad beside the trust folder. "First, I'm filing a motion to void the sale on grounds that the seller lacked authority to convey. That's a straightforward argument. Your brother is not the trustee. He cannot sell trust property. The sale is void. That's a legal position, not a negotiating position." "The buyer," Nina said. "What happens to them?" "Sonoran Western Properties will be named in the action. If they purchased in good faith, genuinely without knowledge of the trust, they have a claim against the title company and potentially against your brother for the money they paid. If they had reason to know and proceeded anyway, the situation is more complex, and the consequences for them are also more complex. Either way, your position does not depend on theirs. The trust is clear. You are the trustee. The property is yours. The mechanism by which it was sold without your knowledge is a separate legal problem with multiple potentially responsible parties." "How long does this take?" Angela looked at her without softening the answer. "Months if it's contested. Your brother will hire a lawyer the moment he's served. That lawyer will argue that the trust is invalid, that your mother lacked capacity, that the sale was in good faith, anything they can find. The title company will hire their own counsel. Sonoran Western will do the same. It will become a multi-party dispute and it will take time." She paused. "But I want you to understand something about your position in that dispute. You are right. The documents are unambiguous. Right doesn't always win quickly. But in this case, right is extremely well documented." Nina thought about the $875 per month on Grant Road. She thought about Gerald Oviatt's hourly rate, which was reasonable, and Angela's, which she had not yet asked about. She thought about the folder of legal documents spreading across the desks of people she didn't know yet, multiplying into a case that would eat months and money she did not have. She said, "I can't afford a long fight." Angela's expression shifted slightly. Not to pity. Nina recognized pity, and this was not it. This was something else. The expression of someone who has been expecting this particular turn in the conversation and has prepared for it. "Your mother thought about that," Angela said. She reached into the folder and brought out a third document, smaller than the others. A single page with a handwritten addendum at the bottom, in the same cramped, neat handwriting from the grocery lists and the signature line. "Your mother left a letter with this office. I was instructed to give it to you when you came to see me, and not before." She held it out across the desk. "She was specific that you had to find your own way here," she said, "and I wrote this down because I thought it mattered. If Nina finds this office, it means she went looking. If she went looking, it means she knows something is wrong and she needs what I've left for her. Give it to her then, not before." Nina took the envelope, her name on the front, her mother's handwriting. She held it the way she had held the rosary on Madeira Lane, with both hands, carefully. "Take your time," Angela said. She stood, refilled her own coffee mug from the carafe on the credenza, and moved to stand at the window with her back to Nina. Nina opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, front and back of the second, in Dolores's handwriting, dated 14 months before she died. It began without preamble, the way her mother always began the conversations that mattered. "Mija, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry about it, and I am sorry that I was right. I would have preferred to have been wrong. I have made arrangements with Ms. Ruiz that I believe are legally sound. She will explain them to you. I trust her judgment more than I trust anyone I have met in a lawyer's office, which is not something I say easily. I want to tell you why I did this the way I did it. I did not tell you about the trust because telling you would have meant handing you something heavy to carry, and you are already carrying enough. You have been carrying enough since your father died and you were 13 years old and you just absorbed it and kept going. I have watched you absorb things your whole life and keep going, and I have always been proud of that and also sorry for it because you should not have had to absorb so much. Marco is my son and I love him. I want you to know that first. What I also want you to know is that I have seen what money does to people who have not had to work the way we worked for it. Not always, but sometimes. And I watched something happen to your brother over the years that I could not name exactly but that I recognized. A way of looking at things and deciding what they were worth. A way of looking at people and deciding the same thing. He loves you. I believe that. But he has also, I think, looked at your life and decided something about it that isn't true. He has decided that because you chose to be here, because you chose to stay and do the hard daily work while he built his career in Phoenix, that somehow the choices cancel each other out. That you chose less and therefore are owed less. I don't believe that. I believe the opposite. I believe that choosing to stay is the harder thing, and that the person who chooses the harder thing deserves more, not less. This house is yours, Nina. I should have put it in your name from the beginning and I didn't, because I was trying to be fair in a way that I understand now was not actually fair. Being fair to two people is not always possible. Sometimes the right thing to do is the honest thing, and the honest thing is that you earned this. Ms. Ruiz has the instructions for the trust. She also has an envelope I have left in her safe, which she will give you after you have read this letter. The envelope has some money in. Not a great deal, but enough to start. I put aside what I could for the past 2 years from my Social Security and the money Marco sent monthly, a little at a time, so that if something happened and you needed to fight for the house, you would have something to fight with. I know this is not a fair thing to leave you with. I know you would rather just have me here. I would rather be there. But since I cannot be, I want you to know that I was paying attention. I was paying attention the whole time. I saw what you gave up and I saw how you gave it up, without complaint, without expectation, with the specific kind of love that doesn't announce itself. That is the kind I tried to give you, too, when I could. Fight for the house, Mija. It blooms every June. Your mother. Nina folded the letter. She held it in her lap for a moment with both hands pressed flat against it. Angela remained at the window, her back still turned, looking at Broadway. Nina had learned in the weeks since her mother's death that grief was not one thing. It came in different textures and at unexpected angles. What came now, sitting in the chair in Angela Ruiz's office on a Wednesday morning in July, was not sadness exactly. It was the particular compound feeling of being known by someone who is no longer present, of being understood by a person who cannot hear you acknowledge the understanding. Her mother had seen all of it, the apartment, the $16.40 an hour, the choice to stay, the choice Dolores herself called the harder thing. She had seen it, and she had saved money from her Social Security in small amounts over 2 years to make sure Nina had something to fight with. She set the letter down. You have an envelope. Angela turned from the window. I do. She went to the credenza and unlocked the small cabinet at the bottom and brought out a standard white envelope, sealed with Nina's name on it. She set it on the desk. Inside the envelope was a savings book from Desert Financial Credit Union and a handwritten note with an account number and a 4-digit PIN. The savings book showed regular monthly deposits of between $200 and $400 over 26 months. The balance at last statement was $6,840. Nina sat with the savings book in her hands and thought about her mother putting aside between $200 and $400 every single month for 2 years. On a fixed income, on a Social Security check and the money Marco sent, which had never been enormous and which Dolores had probably been stretching in the particular way of a woman who had been stretching money her whole adult life, carefully and without complaint and never telling anyone. $6,840. Set aside over 26 months, in case her daughter needed to fight for something that was already hers. She thought about what that required. Not the money, she understood the money abstractly. What she thought about was the decision, made over 26 months, to set aside something every month and never mention it, never use it for something easier, never let herself feel that the need might not materialize. To keep the money there because the need might come. To trust that if the need came, Nina would find her way to this office, would follow the thread she had left for her, and would arrive at this chair. The trust, the letter, the savings. Her mother had built all of it alone. In the specific patient way she built everything, without drama or announcement, and had left it sitting for Nina to find at exactly the right moment. She had, Nina thought, been several moves ahead. The whole time. She walked out of Angela Ruiz's office at 10:53. She stood on the Broadway sidewalk in the July heat with her folder of documents and the savings book and the letter in her bag. She called Gerald Oviatt from the sidewalk and told him what she had learned. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he wanted to connect her with a litigator he respected who handled property disputes. He said he thought the position was very strong. He said, in the careful way of a man who rarely made predictions, that if the title company had done what it appeared they had done, this was not going to go quietly. She was walking to her car when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize, an 886 area code she didn't place. She answered, "Miss Castro, this is Raymond Kessler. I'm sorry to call without warning. I got your number from David's card, which you gave him in the parking lot. I hope that's all right." She stopped walking. "Mr. Kessler, I would like to speak with you today if you're available. I know this is unexpected. I want to tell you something you need to know, and I think it's better said in person than on the phone." A pause. "I know about the house on Madeira Lane." She stood on the Broadway sidewalk and the heat pressed down on everything and a bus went past and the air tasted of exhaust and the particular Tucson July that had always tasted the same. She thought about a man sitting in a parking lot on asphalt, a cane just out of reach, 3 people walking past. "I'll come to you," she said. She was at the Kessler house in the foothills by noon. David let her in, the same quiet handshake as before, the same quality of a man who understood that his purpose in this moment was to get her to the room where his father was and not to complicate the passage. Raymond was in the armchair, upright this time, no ice pack, the law journal gone. He had a manila folder on his knee and his reading glasses already on. He waited until she had sat before he started. "I want to tell you first how I know because that matters," he said. "Paul Dutton is a colleague I've worked with for 30 years. He handles commercial title insurance. He called me last Thursday to ask about a transaction that had crossed his desk because the property address was one I mentioned to him in passing 4 months ago. In March." He paused. "After you came back to check on me with the card." Nina looked at him. "You told him about me?" "I told him I had met someone in a parking lot who was interesting, and I mentioned the street she lived near because we were talking about that neighborhood's property dynamics. It was a casual conversation. I didn't think anything of it until he called last Thursday and said the address that came up in a title dispute review was on Madeira Lane." Raymond's voice was level, but something underneath it had weight. "He pulled the file for me as a professional courtesy. I have been in real estate law for 41 years, Miss Castro. I know what I was looking at." He opened the manila folder on his knee and took out a single page, a copy of something she recognized. A title commitment form, the kind she had started seeing in Gerald Oviatt's office. The preliminary title search on 1412 Madeira Lane shows the Dolores Castro Revocable Living Trust clearly recorded, in the correct position in the instrument sequence, exactly where it should be. He tapped the page. The final commitment issued to the buyer, Sonoran Western Properties, does not contain the trust notation. The item was removed between the preliminary and the final. That is not an automated process. Someone made that decision. Angela Ruiz told me this morning. "I know. I called her office on Monday." He saw her expression. "She knew you were coming in. She agreed that if you were the person she believed you to be, you would make your own way to the right people, and that she didn't want me arriving first and disrupting what your mother had set up for you to find yourself." She was correct about that. The faintest suggestion of approval in his voice. The tone of a man who respects precision. "What I can add to what she told you is this. I know the closing attorney on this transaction. His name is Bernard Locke. He has a practice on Campbell Avenue. He has been handling real estate closings in this city for 22 years. Nina waited. Bernard Locke handled 3 closings for Sonoran Western Properties in the past 18 months. He is not a title company employee. He is a private closing attorney they bring in on transactions that require speed or discretion. The title commitment that went to Sonoran Western with the trust notation removed, Bernard Locke signed the final review on that commitment. She was very still. He knew. He had access to everything Paul Dutton had access to. He ran the same search. He saw the same trust. And his signature is on the document that went to the buyer without it. Raymond closed the folder. There's something else. Something that arrived in my email this morning from Paul, who has been doing his own digging because he does not like what he sees. He found a financial relationship between Bernard Locke and a Gary Pollard of Phoenix, who is the real estate agent your brother used to list the Madeira Lane property. The parking lot. The 130 degrees of July asphalt. 3 people walking past. She thought about standing up and walking to a man on the ground because he was there and she was there and he needed help. She had not done it for Raymond Kessler because he was a 41-year real estate attorney with a network covering Pima County. She had done it because his cane was out of reach and the asphalt was hot and no one else had stopped. The world had its own arithmetic. What kind of financial relationship? She asked. 3 transactions in the last 4 years in which Pollard brought Locke in as closing attorney and Locke received a closing fee that was 20% above his standard rate. 2 of those transactions involved trust properties sold without proper trustee authorization. He looked at her over his glasses. Paul has forwarded his findings to the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions and to the State Bar Association. As of this morning, both inquiries are pending. This is not over for Bernard Locke, and it is not over for Gary Pollard. She thought about Marco. She thought about the controlled, measured rhythm of his voice on the phone when she had called from the parking lot. The way he had said, "I was going to tell you," with the patience of a man who had already decided what telling her could and couldn't cost him. Did Marco know? She said. About the trust? Did he know before the sale? Raymond looked at her for a moment. Then he said carefully, "That is the question Paul and I have been working around the edges of since Thursday. What I can tell you is this. The trust is recorded. It is a public document. Any person who ran a property search on 1412 Madeira Lane before listing it would have found it. That search takes 15 minutes and costs nothing at the county recorder's website." He paused. "The question of whether your brother ran that search before listing the property is one I cannot answer yet. What I can tell you is that a man who described a trust-encumbered property to a real estate agent as a probate estate needing to move quickly either did not check, or checked and decided the problem could be managed. Neither of those was a good answer. She knew that. She sat with both of them. "I want to help you," Raymond said. "I want to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't. I am not practicing law. I am consulting, as I sometimes do for former colleagues, and I am doing so in this instance as a private individual who has a personal interest in the outcome. I will not be standing in a courtroom, but I have connections in this city that span 4 decades, and I know which doors to knock on and in which order, and I know how the people behind those doors think. If you'll let me help from that position, I'd like to." Nina looked at the man in the armchair. 70-something, reading glasses, a folder on his knee, a framed photograph of his dead wife on the credenza behind his chair. A man who had been on asphalt in a parking lot with his cane out of reach. She had brought him a card from Walgreens because she had wondered if his hip was okay. She had come back the next day because it had felt like the right thing. That was all it had been. "Why?" she said. Not to challenge him. She genuinely wanted to know. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who says things plainly and is deciding on the plainest version. "Because you stopped," he said. "In the parking lot. 3 other people didn't. You did. And then you came back the next day with a card from the drugstore, which nobody does, and you sat in that chair and drank coffee and talked to me like I was worth talking to." He looked at the folder. "I have been in real estate law for 41 years. I have seen a great many things done to people who trusted that their family would behave decently. I have not always been in a position to do something about it. In this case, I am. That's the whole answer." She nodded slowly. She thought she understood what he meant. She thought she understood something about what it meant to be useful when you had the means to be, to not sit still when you had the capacity to move. Her mother had understood it. Angela Ruiz had built a practice around it. Raymond had spent 41 years watching it fail and succeed in the specific legal theater of property and money and family. She said, "What's the first door?" The first door was Sonoran Western Properties. Raymond made the call himself that afternoon, from the armchair with Nina still in the chair across from him. He called a man named Griffin Mercer, who was the company's general counsel, whom Raymond had worked alongside in a county planning dispute 8 years earlier. He did not lead with a threat. He led with a professional courtesy. There was a title defect on a recent acquisition, Raymond said, that he thought the company's legal team would want to know about before they went further with any development plans for the property. He gave the address. He gave the date of the closing. He said he had documentation of the defect and would be happy to share it with Griffin directly before anything was filed in court. Griffin Mercer called back in 40 minutes. He asked Raymond to give him until end of business Thursday to review the file internally. Raymond said that was reasonable. She drove home from the foothills with the windows down in the 100-degree afternoon, the heat moving through the car like something alive. She stopped at the school and collected Lily, who was talking before she reached the car door. At the apartment, while Lily ate a snack at the table and narrated, Nina stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the folder from Angela's office and the savings book from the credit union and the letter in her mother's handwriting. She thought about what the months ahead were going to look like. The legal process Angela had described, measured in months and paperwork and the specific grinding patience of institutional dispute, everything moving at the speed of courts and title companies and insurance investigators. She thought about what her mother had anticipated and what she had built against it. A trust, a letter, $6,000 and change, a careful lawyer on Broadway who had kept the file in her cabinet and waited for Nina to find her own way to the door. She thought about Raymond Kessler picking up the phone to call Griffin Mercer, not because he had been hired to and not because it cost him nothing, but because he had 41 years of knowing which call to make and he had decided to use that knowledge. She thought about what it meant when people with the capacity to help chose to use it, not from obligation, not from calculation, but from the simpler and more durable reason that it was right. She made dinner. Chicken and rice, the same recipe her mother had made every Thursday. She put the Bougainvillea from the pot on the back porch. She had taken a cutting 2 years ago, a small branch her mother had told her to plant, which had rooted and grown and now bloomed the same deep magenta every June. Dolores had said take this one, Mija, in case, and Nina had not asked in case of what. She understood now. In case of all of it. Thursday came. Griffin Mercer called Raymond at 4:15. Raymond relayed the call to Nina in 3 sentences. Sonoran Western had retained independent title counsel to review the defect. Their preliminary review confirmed the trust recording and the absence of the notation from the final commitment. They were suspending all development plans for the Madeira Lane property pending resolution and were prepared to cooperate with a corrective action in lieu of litigation. What does that mean? Nina said. It means they may have bought in good faith and they know it. It means their own lawyer told them they're holding a property they don't legally own, and they'd rather fix it quietly than fight it publicly and expensively. Raymond's voice on the phone had the specific quality of a man reporting something that has gone as he expected it to go. It also means their next call is going to be to Bernard Locke. Bernard Locke received that call on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, he had placed a call to his own malpractice carrier. By the following Monday, the State Bar had received 2 formal complaints, one from Paul Dutton's firm and one, filed separately, from Griffin Mercer's counsel at Sonoran Western. Marco received Angela Ruiz's formal legal notice, a motion to void the sale and a cease and desist on any further action regarding the trust property, on a Monday morning in Phoenix. Nina knew this because his number appeared on her phone 14 times between 9 a.m. and noon. She did not answer. She had asked Gerald Oviatt to field Marco's lawyer when one materialized, and she had asked Angela to handle anything Marco sent through legal channels, and she had decided for herself that she was not going to have a conversation with him until she had something concrete and resolved to say. She was not ready for that conversation yet. She was not sure what she wanted from it, what it could give her, whether Marco's explanation for any of it would change the shape of what he had done. She knew her own answer to that question, but she needed to sit with it longer. She needed to be certain she was answering it for herself and not out of the particular anger that lived close to the surface in those weeks, which was real and legitimate and also not the right foundation for the conversation she was going to have with her brother eventually. Lily was the one who asked directly. She had been absorbing the changed quality of her mother's days. The phone calls, the paperwork on the table, the specific tension that Nina tried to minimize, and that Lily, who was 9 and perceptive in the specific way of a child raised by one careful observant parent, noticed without needing to be told. On a Thursday evening, while Nina was at the kitchen table with the folder, Lily came out from behind the curtain in her pajamas and said, "Is it about Grandma's house?" Nina looked up. "Yes. Did Uncle Marco do something bad?" Nina set the folder down. She thought about the right version of this. She thought about the versions she had run through her own mind for the past 6 weeks. The version where she called him calculating, the version where she called him opportunistic, the one where she described what she felt when she saw the sign in the Bougainvillea her mother had been tending for 30 years. None of them were the version to give to Lily. "Uncle Marco made a decision about the house that he shouldn't have made," she said. "We're working on fixing it." Lily looked at her with the steady, unblinking assessment of a child who has been answered carefully and is deciding whether the careful answer is also a complete one. "Is it going to be okay?" she said. "I think so," Nina said. "Grandma made some plans before she died. She was thinking ahead." "About the house?" "About a lot of things." Lily seemed to absorb this. She sat down in the chair across from Nina, the same chair Nina used when they were having the real conversations, and she folded her hands on the table in a way that was so precisely her mother's gesture that Nina felt the pang of it somewhere below her ribs. "She knew there might be a problem," Lily said. "I think she did. And she fixed it before it happened." "She tried to, yes." Lily was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder on the table. Then she said, with the simple directness of a child who has cut to the center of something, "That sounds like her." It did. It sounded exactly like her. Nina picked up the folder and closed it and said, "Go to bed, Lil. I'll come in a minute." Lily went back behind the curtain. Nina sat at the table with the closed folder and the kitchen light and the Bougainvillea cutting on the back porch in the dark and the $60,000 she hadn't touched sitting in her account like a marker of everything that had been done, and she let herself feel for a few minutes without managing the feeling, which she did not often allow herself to do. Her mother had been here. Her mother had been paying attention. The proof of it was in every document in that folder, in every monthly deposit in the credit union book, in the careful handwriting at the bottom of 2 pages. Dolores Castro had seen what was coming and she had built against it, alone and without complaint, in the patient exact way she did everything. She had believed that if she built it right, Nina would find her own way to it. She had been right. The weeks that followed had the specific texture of a process working slowly in the right direction. Not fast, not without friction, but moving. Angela Ruiz filed the motion to void the sale. Gerald Oviatt connected Nina with a litigator named Patricia Gentry who specialized in exactly this category of property dispute and who, when she reviewed the documents Angela had assembled, told Nina with the direct practicality of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years that the case was as clean as she had seen in a long time. She said as clean as rather than simply clean, and Nina appreciated the precision. Marco's lawyer, a Phoenix attorney named Reed Calloway who operated with the practiced aggression of a man hired to delay and complicate rather than to find a resolution, filed a challenge to the trust's validity on grounds that Dolores Castro had been unduly influenced in its formation. The filing named Angela Ruiz as the influencing party and suggested that the trust represented the outcome of a relationship of improper professional persuasion, rather than Dolores's own wishes. Angela read the filing in her office on a Wednesday afternoon and called Nina to read her a particular sentence from it. She read it once, and then she said in the even tone of a woman who has been practicing law for 20 years and has heard most things, "This is a weak argument made by a lawyer whose client has a weak position. I have 2.5 hours of meeting notes, a letter in your mother's handwriting dated 14 months before her death, and the signatures of a notary and 2 witnesses on documents that were reviewed and signed across 2 separate visits 6 weeks apart. If Mr. Calloway would like to argue undue influence in an Arizona courtroom, I will be ready for him." She said it without heat. She said it the way Dolores had probably said things when she had made a decision and was simply communicating it. Raymond Kessler forwarded Nina a document on the 3rd Thursday of August. An email from Paul Dutton, attached to a 2-page report from the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions. Bernard Locke's license had been placed under review pending investigation of his conduct in 3 transactions, including the closing of 1412 Madeira Lane. Gary Pollard had been contacted by the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding the same transactions. Neither was facing criminal charges yet. Paul's email was careful on this point, but both were under formal investigation by their respective licensing bodies, which meant neither could freely practice while the investigations were ongoing. The effective consequence for Bernard Locke was that Sonoran Western's independent title counsel, having confirmed his role in the altered commitment document, was now formally cooperating with the void action rather than opposing it. Their position had shifted completely. They were no longer the buyer defending a purchase. They were a company that had been defrauded in a closing, seeking their money back from the parties responsible for the fraud, which meant the person the money was coming back from was Marco. She was at the kitchen table with the August folder. The folder had grown to 2 folders, then 3 when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. A 520 area code, Tucson local, said, "This is David Kessler. Dad would like to know if you and your daughter would come for dinner on Saturday. He says he has some updates and he'd rather tell you in person and feed you at the same time. You've both been working hard. Let me know." She looked at the text for a moment. She thought about Raymond in the armchair asking what's the first door, about Paul Dutton's emails arriving in his inbox at 7 in the morning, about 41 years of built knowledge being directed at a problem because a woman had stopped in a parking lot when 3 others hadn't. She wrote back, "We'll be there. Thank you." She put the phone down. She picked up the folder. She went back to work. Saturday arrived dry and bright the way late August in Tucson is dry and bright. The rainy season winding down, the air beginning to carry the first faint suggestion of a shift. Not cool yet, but no longer absolutely relentless in the way of July. She drove to the foothills with Lily in the passenger seat eating the crackers she always ate in the car, narrating the route in the same complete confidence tone she brought to most things. David let them in. Raymond was standing this time, the cane in his right hand, and he reached out his left to shake Lily's hand when she came through the door. Lily looked at the hand and then at the man and then shook it with both of hers, because she had been taught to shake hands properly, and she said, "You have the same name as a person in my reading book." Raymond looked at her with the specific delight that certain older people feel in the presence of children who say exactly what they think, and he said, "Is he a good character or a bad one?" Lily considered this. "Pretty good," she said. "He makes mistakes, but he fixes them." Raymond laughed, a full genuine laugh. David smiled from the kitchen doorway. They ate at the table in the dining room, the 4 of them, a dinner David had clearly spent some time on. Roasted chicken and green beans and bread from a bakery on Campbell, and a peach pie that David admitted he had not made himself. Lily ate with the appetite of a child who had been eating well but simply and who recognized something better and adjusted accordingly. Raymond waited until the main course was finished before he set his fork down and looked at Nina. "I want to tell you what I've learned this week," he said. "I've been sitting on it since Thursday because I wanted to be sure of it before I said it." Nina set her own fork down. Across the table, Lily was examining the remaining bread with focused attention. "I asked Paul to look at the search history on the Madeira Lane recorder page," Raymond said. "The county recorder's online system logs access by date and by the user account or search session that generated the query. It's technical and Paul had to call in a favor to get the access logs. But he got them." He folded his hands on the table. The cane was hooked over the back of his chair. Outside the dining room window, the foothills afternoon light moved slowly across the desert landscaping his wife had put in years ago and that he had maintained carefully since. The Dolores Castro Revocable Living Trust appears in the Recorded Instruments database. Someone ran a property search on 1412 Madeira Lane on March 14th of this year, 4 weeks before your mother died. The search was run from an IP address that geolocates to a commercial property management software firm in Phoenix. The same firm your brother's real estate contacts use for property analysis. The table was very quiet. David was still in the kitchen. Lily had found something interesting in the bread and was occupied with it. "He ran the search," Nina said. "Someone at that IP address ran the search," Raymond said carefully. "It would take a subpoena to determine exactly who. But the address belongs to the kind of firm a Phoenix-based commercial developer uses. And the date, for weeks before your mother's death, is the kind of date you search a property if you are planning to move quickly once a death occurs. For weeks before, her mother had still been alive. The last real conversation Nina had had with her, the one about the Bougainvillea and the cutting she had taken 2 years earlier, the one where Dolores had said the flowers looked healthy and Mija, your father would have been proud. For weeks before that, he had known about the trust and he had moved anyway. He had found the closing attorney and the real estate agent and the buyer willing to close fast, and he had found a way to move the property past the trust notation the way you move a piece of furniture past a doorway that's just barely too narrow. With effort and the right tool and someone willing to look away from the scratch marks on the wall. She sat at Raymond Kessler's dining room table with the August light coming through the window and the bread and the peach pie and her daughter across from her carefully not listening, which meant she was absolutely listening, and she thought about her mother going to Angela Ruiz's office in August 2 years ago. She thought about what her mother had seen coming. She thought about the phrase "no one can interfere," which Angela had written in her meeting notes. Her mother had known. Dolores had not said Marco's name to Angela, but she had known, and she had built what she could build, and then she had lived the remaining 2 years with that knowledge and that preparation, sitting quietly beneath every Sunday phone call and every Christmas visit and every airport hug, and she had said nothing, and she had continued being his mother with the same warmth she had always been, because that was the kind of woman she was. She could protect herself and love you at the same time. She could prepare for the worst you were capable of while still hoping you would not do it. He had done it, and she had been ready. She had been years ready. Nina said very quietly, "She knew for 2 years." "Yes," Raymond said. She looked at the table. She picked up her water glass and set it down without drinking from it. She thought about what this conversation would eventually need to become, the one with Marco, the one that had no good version and no clean ending, the one that was going to happen somewhere past the legal process when all the paperwork was resolved and the house was hers again and there was nothing left between them but what had been done and what it meant. She was not ready for that yet. She was going to need more than August to be ready for that. "What happens to him?" she said. Raymond's voice was level. "He faces civil liability for the losses Sonoran Western suffered in the transaction. He faces potential civil fraud claims from you, through Angela, for the unauthorized sale of trust property. If the IP address information leads where it appears to lead, and if a prosecutor decides the intent to sell a trust property with knowledge of the restriction constitutes fraud, there may be criminal exposure. I can't tell you the outcome of any of that. I can tell you it is not going to be a quiet resolution." She nodded slowly. "The house. The void action is strong." Patricia Gentry agrees. "Once Sonoran Western's cooperation is formalized and Bernard Locke's conduct is documented through the State Bar investigation, the basis for voiding the sale is overwhelming. What Angela has filed is solid and it will hold." He looked at her directly. "You're going to get the house back, Miss Castro. I am not in the habit of saying things I'm not confident of. I'm confident of this." She looked at him across the table, this man who had been on asphalt in a parking lot 3 other people walked past, who had spent 41 years building the exact knowledge and the exact network that were right now being aimed at the problem someone had built for her. She thought about her mother on March 14th, for weeks before she died, still alive, still making iced tea and watching the street from the window with the fan going, still calling every Sunday. And somewhere in Phoenix, a search running on the recorder database. He thought he'd already won. He thought the numbers were simple enough that she'd take the 60,000 and be angry for a while and then adjust. He hadn't known about Angela. He hadn't known about the trust being bulletproof. He hadn't known that his mother had spent 2 years building something specifically because she had seen him coming. And he hadn't known that a woman who stopped for strangers in parking lots would find her way to a retired attorney in the foothills who would pick up his phone and start making calls. David brought the peach pie. Lily looked at it with total focus. Raymond said, "This is the part where we eat dessert and stop talking about lawyers for the rest of the evening." He looked at Lily. "What do you know about architecture?" Lily looked up from the pie. "Like buildings." "Yes, like buildings." "Some things," she said carefully, which was the answer she gave when she knew more than she was sure was appropriate to say. Raymond smiled. "Tell me." And Lily, who had been raised to speak to adults like they were people, told him. Nina sat in the dining room in the foothills on a late August Saturday with the legal folder in her car and the savings book at home in the kitchen drawer and her mother's letter folded in her coat pocket, where she was beginning to keep it the way you keep things that anchor you. She ate the peach pie. She listened to Lily talk about buildings and the way old ones remembered the hands that built them. She let the evening move at its own pace, the unhurried pace of a meal shared with people who had decided that this evening mattered and were willing to be present in it. Outside, the desert caught the last of the August light and held it a little longer than you'd expect, the way desert always holds light, longer and lower and more gold than anywhere else she'd ever been. The Bougainvillea she had on the back porch at Grant Road was probably catching the same light right now, the same deep magenta her mother had spent 30 years tending. She thought, it blooms every June. She thought, I know, I'm going to be there. The void action was granted on a Tuesday morning in October, for months after Nina had parked in front of her mother's house and read the word sold in the Bougainvillea. Angela called at 8:47. She said the judge had reviewed the trust documentation, Sonoran Western's cooperative filing, the State Bar's preliminary findings on Bernard Locke, and Patricia Gentry's brief, and had ruled that the sale of 1412 Madeira Lane was void from the moment of closing. The property had never legally transferred. It had always been Nina's. Nina was in the parking lot of the dialysis center where her client had a morning appointment. She sat in the car after Angela hung up and looked at the windshield for a long moment. The October morning was doing something the July and August mornings hadn't. It was actually cool. Not cold, but the specific tentative cool of a Tucson October that means the worst is genuinely over and the air is going to be something other than hostile for the next few months. She sat in it and breathed and let the ruling become real at whatever pace it needed. She called Raymond from the same parking lot. He picked up on the second ring. I heard, he said before she could speak. Paul had already texted him. How are you? I'm sitting in a parking lot, she said. Yes, he said. That seems right. She went inside to collect her client. She worked the rest of the morning. She picked up Lily from school. She drove to Madeira Lane. She parked in front of the house at 4:15 in the afternoon. The October light came in at the low angle of a season turning, warm and specific, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they mean something, which Nina had always thought was just the light being honest. The Bougainvillea along the fence had finished its summer bloom and gone quiet the way it went quiet every fall, pulled back into itself, saving what it had for the next June. It looked exactly as it had always looked. It looked like her mother's fence, which it was. The lockbox was gone from the door. Angela had arranged for its removal through Sonoran Western's counsel the day before, along with the return of the original key. Nina had the key in her pocket. She had been carrying it since September, when Angela had it sent over because she had wanted to have it before the ruling, wanted it to be a thing she already held rather than something handed to her at the last moment. She got out of the car. Lily got out beside her. They stood at the fence together. The Bougainvillea, the porch, the front door that was the same door it had always been, painted the same dark red her mother had painted it in 2008 because Dolores had decided she wanted a red door and had stood in the hardware store for 40 minutes selecting the exact right shade. Is it ours now? Lily said. It was always ours, Nina said. The judge just confirmed it. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to accurate statements. Then she said, Can we go in? Nina took out the key. The house smelled like a house that had been closed for months. Warm and still and faintly of the particular combination of things her mother had always used, the laundry detergent, the dish soap, something she had never been able to identify that was simply the smell of Dolores's kitchen and nowhere else on earth. Nina stood inside the front door for a moment and let that smell arrive and be what it was. Lily moved through the rooms with the careful attention of someone taking inventory of a place they love and haven't seen in a while. She touched the window frame in the living room, the ceramic figure of Our Lady still on the kitchen sill where Nina had not yet been able to move it, the curtain in the back bedroom that her mother had made herself from fabric she found at a Saturday market 20 years ago. Nina stood in the kitchen. She put her hand flat on the table, the same table, the one she had sat across from her mother at for 30 years, and she looked at the window above the sink where the light came in at the same angle it had always come in, the October version of it, lower and less aggressive than July but present, the light doing what Tucson light did, arriving honestly and staying. The table, the window, The smell of the kitchen. The Bougainvillea outside. Her mother had built this and then built around it, layer by layer, the trust and the letter and the savings and the name of the attorney on a deed where Nina would eventually find it. She had built all of it quietly while continuing to be exactly who she had always been. The woman with the iced tea on the porch and the curtain she made herself and the Bougainvillea she tended every spring and the rosary worn smooth from 30 years of daily use. She had not done any of it to win. She had done it because this was her daughter's house, and she was not going to let anyone take her daughter's house while she still had the capacity to prevent it. Marco's situation resolved the way these things resolve when the legal ground has collapsed beneath them. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with a series of filings and counterfilings and eventually a settlement demand from Patricia Gentry that his lawyer negotiated down and then accepted because the alternative was a trial Marco could not win. He paid back the $60,000 he had sent Nina and agreed to additional damages for the costs of the void action. Bernard Locke surrendered his license. Gary Pollard's license was under review through the following year. The criminal exposure Raymond had mentioned never materialized into charges, which was its own kind of outcome, the kind that is not justice exactly but is the shape justice takes when the evidence reaches a threshold and no further. She did not call Marco after the settlement. She had thought about what to say to him across enough evenings that she had exhausted the versions, and what remained was something that did not fit on a phone call. Maybe one day it would fit somewhere. She did not know yet. She left the door as something other than closed, because he was her brother and their mother had loved him genuinely, and she was not her mother's daughter if she closed doors that her mother would have left open. She moved into the house in November. She and Lily. Lily's books on the shelf in the back bedroom, the one with the curtain Dolores had made, and her drawing things on the desk Nina bought at the Saturday market 4 blocks away. The Bougainvillea outside waiting for June. The kitchen table where the light came in the same way it had always come in. On the first Sunday after they moved in, Nina made eggs at the stove and Lily sat at the counter and told her about what she was reading with both hands moving, certain and expressive. The kitchen smelled like the kitchen. The October sun came in at its low honest angle. The ceramic figure was on the windowsill where it had lived for 30 years. Nina stood at her mother's stove and thought. She was right. Someone had to stop. Someone always has to stop. She thought about a parking lot in March and a cane on hot asphalt. She thought about a woman sitting alone at a kitchen table 2 years before she died, writing the name of an attorney on a piece of paper. She thought about the way kindness works when it is real, the way it travels farther than you can see from where you're standing, arriving in shapes you didn't plan for, at the exact moment it was always going to arrive. The eggs were ready. She plated them. She set the plates on the table where her mother had always set the plates and sat across from her daughter in the house that had always been theirs. It bloomed every June. It was going to bloom again. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.